say a few words. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's really fantastic to see such a great turnout to an event like this. This past Sunday was Yom Hashoah, which in Hebrew means it's a day of remembrance for the victims of the Holocaust. And all too often, what we end up doing is simply talking about a number. We talk about 6 million. But it's really important to remember that this is an event which it was not clinical, it's not a matter of a number. It affected people. And that's why it's really important and really good to listen to survivors of this calamity and to be able to connect directly and engage with personal stories. So I'm not going to talk much more. This is Mr. Richard Rozen, OAM. We are very, very lucky to have him. So he'll speak for about 40 minutes, and when his time is over, we'll have time for questions. So if you want to ask any questions, keep it in your head, and you'll be able to ask when Mr. Rozen finishes his talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I haven't got a speech. I spent 5 years doing the war, so I remember something. And those of you that think that I'm looking a bit young to be a survivor, thank you for the compliment. I'm 78 years old, so I was there. Born in Poland, Rozen, in 1935, of a holiday. I was translated a middle class to upper class family. My father was a doctor, my mother was a nurse, I had a nanny, and life was good. I had a girlfriend at the age of 5. Her name was Helenka. She was the daughter of one of the doctors that was working together with my father in the hospital. And we both had little cars. I think we're the only two to have cars because they came in from France. Both my father and his colleagues studied in France. For those of you that don't know, there was such an arrangement in Poland that if you were a Jew, you couldn't get into university. They couldn't file you writing, but they could file you oral, so you couldn't get into university. To get into university, you had to pass. It doesn't matter how clever you are, you automatically file you oral. So my father studied in France. So that's why we had those little carts, which they brought from France. And we used to go up into the park nearly every day, gardens, before free school, of course. And we used to take petrol from a certain tree. We meet together because I knew that my father used to get petrol from something or other, but that was far away. But so we get petrol from that tree in the garden. So life was good. It stopped. Germans invaded Poland. We tried to run away towards Russia because we thought that we'd better why we could already see problems before. It didn't take long, shortly after the invasion, that there were the restrictions put on Jews. And so we decided to go towards east, towards Russia, but we weren't fast enough. And we managed to get across a certain river called Bok, which took us to the Russian sector of Poland. Poland was divided in half. Half was German, half was Russian. So we felt safe. For me, life became normal once again. I didn't have my little cart anymore, or my girlfriend, but then I had other things to occupy my mind for a while. My father was in charge of the hospital, life was good again. Well, not as good as before, but was good. Suddenly, after about 9 months, the Germans went across the river and invaded that part of Poland and Russia. So we went into hiding now. And my father had saved up some gold coins. That was the currency that people used to save if they could, because Polish zlotys or Russian rubles fluctuated too much as they do today. But gold was gold. So that was that. It was arranged to someone, I wasn't privy to it, for us to go into hiding. So we were taken somewhere by cart to a farm, and we came there late in the evening, so I didn't see anybody really. We were smuggled into the cellar, and we got a cupboard, which was the size of 2 meters long, about a meter high, because I had no problem walking between my parents, and about a meter wide. My parents could not stand, of course, in the cupboard. I could. So they were crouching or lying, and we spent 13 months in that cupboard. in total darkness, never came out of the cupboard for 30 months. Seemed like a long time, especially when he's sort of 7 years old. It's 5th of July, but still. But I got used to everything, and I got used to in the cupboard as well. Things were good in the cupboard for some reason. First of all, food was coming every night. In the middle of the night, the farmer brought food, because nobody knew that we were there. His families and so on could not know that we were there, because, well, harboring the Jews was not a very good investment. Well, for them it was because of the gold coin, but otherwise it might not have been. And we used to get up 2 buckets. 1 bucket of water that we used for drinking and for toiletry. Every day my father made us wash ourselves with a little rag, because we didn't really undress, we just stayed like that. And showers weren't working. So we had a rag and washed ourselves every morning. And drinking, and the other bucket was for toiletry. So we used that for toilet. And every night, next night, the buckets were changed, and some ritual kept on repeating itself. We ate mainly the local things. I remember very clearly, because some of the things I hate now, especially onions. I haven't eaten onions since the war. We used to eat onions all the time. Onions were plentiful in the farm. They were the cheapest food. Well, they're not all like you today. We had whatever vegetables were there, but onions always were available. Summer, right through the period of time. Carrots, cabbage, some stuff, not very fresh bread, and occasionally cold soup, but very little meat. But anyhow, we ate every day, so it was okay. That went on for 12 months. After 12 months, the money ran out. My father, I was told, was a very good doctor and very intelligent, but he hasn't done. He was not perhaps knowledgeable in numbers, like some doctors aren't. And he worked out that the war was going to last for 12 months, but he missed by 4 years. So that was our misfortune. And after 12 months, we were told that we have to vacate the premises. The rent had run out. And my father begged them quite a bit longer, because he thought maybe who knows, maybe another month will be okay. So he got his shoes. He had French shoes, still good quality shoes, better than the one in Poland. And he also got his Omega watch. And we got an extra 4 weeks out of it, but the war still was a long way off. And we were finally thrown out. We were evacuated. We were thrown out in the middle of the night. It was winter. And we started wondering. It wasn't in the forest, but it's like sort of a forest. The farm was in the dark. I can't quite remember what happened there, but it was dark and there was snow. And we came out with our bundles. We each had something. I had a small bundle too on my back, and I didn't have shoes anymore because my feet grew out and we didn't go shopping. So I had rags, the same as my father. Rags. My mother still had the shoes. Both my brother and father were hunched. After you sit for over a year in a cabin and you don't stand up, it didn't affect me because I still couldn't clear the top of the cabin. I was getting close. When I got my finger on my toes, I could touch it. Anyhow, in the cupboard, the important thing happened is that I got to know my father, who was a busy man, busy doctor, like some of you that have got busy fathers that you had never seen, especially when you're young. And he had plenty of time for me. He wasn't going anywhere, nothing like that. So he taught me, my first year of school was in the cupboard. And because we couldn't talk, we had to stay in silence in case someone would hear us. He would whisper into my ear and he would write on the palm of my hand letters and numbers. I still know what a 3 feels like, and I still know what an X feels like, because if I see a letter, I always know how it feels. After 12 months, twice a day, lessons. He was very conscientious. My father wanted me to become somebody. And so he decided that I should start learning. I was 7 years old, I hadn't been to school yet. So I remember, up to 100 and the alphabet upside down. I could backwards and forward and backwards, anyhow. You know what I mean? So, and he told me stories. My mother was always very depressed. She cried most of the time. I couldn't understand why, because for me life was good. I ate every day, lessons every day, watched every day, told me stories. It was good, but for my mother it was bad. So that was that. Started wandering in the forest, we were caught, but before we were caught, because we were thrown out at night, far away, somewhere between the trees, I could see something happening, and I got very excited because I hadn't seen the sun now, or the light now, for, as I said, now it's a quarter of my life. And suddenly I could see some light, and I got very excited. You know, I was going like that, and my father noticed that I was, so he told me to put my hands over my eyes because I hadn't seen the light for so often. He tried to explain to me, but I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand, so I did put my hand, but I kept it split a little bit. So as the sun kept on going, I got very excited, and as I got excited, I started jumping, and please excuse me, I weaned myself from excitement, you know. It happens sometimes if you're too excited, especially when you're 7 years old and you hadn't seen the light for 30 months. That was part of the story. Then we wandered for a while. It didn't take us long. We got caught, taken by some Ukrainian guards, Ukrainian people. It was actually Poland or Ukraine, somewhere on the border there. And we were taken to interrogation, where my father pretended that we were gypsies, because not that gypsies did any better, but in Poland gypsies were doing better than Jews. We were at the bottom of the rank. Reds, Jews, who didn't come out as gypsies and so on, dogs. So that was the pegging order. But they didn't believe us. You see, in Poland, as you probably don't know, only Jewish boys, Jewish men are circumcised. Here it's a question of health or whatever, but in Poland only Jewish. And of course, we were in Poland, and of course, well, that's the story. So all they had to do is to prove whether we were Jewish or gypsies or whatever. Well, it wasn't hard for them to see what happened to us. We're taken away to a ghetto called Lublin Ghetto, where we spent the next 6 months. That, in the ghetto, the reality of the war came to me. Because so far things were changing, but nevertheless, the reality of war came. Because every morning, dead bodies were taken out. The ghetto had already been opened. Lublin Ghetto has been going for at least a year already. So we came sort of in the middle, while we're in the hiding. So by then, people were dying. Old and young were usually taken out at first, but afterwards also the people were taken out, always looking very thin. We didn't have much to eat in the ghetto. I was always in hiding. My parents had to work somewhere. I don't know what they were doing, but they brought some bread in the evening. And that went on, you know, for about 6 months. Then it became our turn to go to a camp called Treblinka, which is one of the 6 extermination camps. Not a concentration, extermination, full stop. You go there to be exterminated. It wasn't a working camp. And so it was our turn. We knew already what it was all about, but we got lucky. And when we got to a holding camp, they had so many customers coming. You came by train, the usual cattle trying to be fed and seen, so yes. But we didn't have to go that far. We didn't go for 6 days. We only had to go for about 24 hours from where we were in Lublin to Treblinka. It was only less than 100 kilometers, but it took nearly a day to get there. Trains were going slow. But we got into a holding area, like a large football ground, or paddocks, because they had so many customers and they could only exterminate that many per hour because they were being gassed and then, exterminated and burnt. So we had to wait in that queue. While we were waiting, that's when we got lucky. My father was recognized by somebody, although he didn't look like the typical Polish doctor. They were all wearing, like I was before, I'm not a doctor, but a suit, tie, they looked really very respectable. Here doctors can look like you and I. You don't know what they are, but in Poland they really look that one with a moustache. And of course now, he was overgrown, no haircut, wearing rags, hunchback. But someone recognized him. He said, Dr. Rozen's like, you can save your life and your wife's and your son's life if you go to the partisans. And we can arrange for it. Partisans in Poland needed doctors, of course, but Polish doctors don't practice in the forest. Why should they? So the only doctors they could get were Jews that they could smuggle out from camps or whatever, ghettos. And we're lucky, we're taken out. I went there together with my father. He had to prove that he was a doctor, but whatever, I don't know what he had to do, but he was a doctor. And so he proved. And I was taken then to the village with my mother. And he stayed there with the partisans. And I became a girl. According to my mother, I was a good-looking girl, but believe it or not. I had long hair by then because I hadn't had anything cut for a year and a half. And so I had long hair. And the reason why I was a girl, because being a boy before wasn't too good for me. So as a girl, at least they're not going to look there if they want to expose us. So I was much safer as a girl, but I had a problem. You see, in Poland, girls and boys speak differently. There's masculine and there's feminine. So you would say, for instance, I have, which is ja miałem. A boy would say miałem, and a girl would say ja miałam. So you change just one letter usually, but it makes all the difference. You know, a boy can't talk like a girl and a girl can't talk like a boy because everything is changes, everything is masculine and feminine. This is, we're used to it when we born. Your mother will know that. She learned Polish when she was young. Very close friend of mine. Oh, grandmother, sorry. Grandmother. Ask her about this feminine. It's a good exercise. Feminine and masculine. Just one letter changes. Okay. So I was a girl, but there is a problem. Being a girl, 8 years old, not having been to school, is a problem. If I go to school, I'll be exposed because I couldn't speak like a girl. So first of all, I wasn't allowed to speak, so I was dumb. And secondly, in order for me not to go to school, there had to be something wrong with me. You have to excuse me, but I was a girl that was unwell in that respect. So I tried to act like anyone that is unwell. I'm sorry about that. That's the way it was. I was doing well. The boys, man, they used to tease me because they knew that I was a bit deranged, and they used to make silly gestures, and silly girls in the room. Is that and so on, and silly girl, I should say. And but so I found a way of reacting because I was beginning already to understand something, and I decided to practice my spitting. And whenever those kids used to tease me, I used to spit. And by the time after a few months I could spit anything up, I could hit you, just where you're sitting there. And that, you know, you'd be surprised. Hey, it stopped. They didn't like my spitting because they thought, well, that girl is deranged. I mean, I used to run up to them and play it again. So they left me alone. After 6 months, that became dangerous to stay there. Because at that stage already, they were looking for Jews everywhere. And my mother was looking more Aryan. Looking Aryan means not having black eye and black hair. So half of you would pass as Aryan, a third of you, and the other 2/3 and 4, yes, you, but no problem. Or you. But many of you with dark hair would have had a problem because Jews mostly have dark hair, and you happen to be fair. Okay, back to the forest. Of course, this time I got a pair of trousers. That was a boy. In the forest, I became a mascot to the partisans. I joined the partisans now for the next year and a half. And they made a lot of fun of me, but I knew about it, that they were making fun of me. First of all, they taught me how to smoke at the age of 10, 9 and a half. But they didn't give me tobacco, because tobacco costs money. They gave me just leaves. They rolled the leaves in newspaper. They also rolled tobacco in newspaper for themselves. So I used to smoke leaves, but I didn't like it, so I gave up smoking. I took it up again 20 years later, but I gave up again. So here I was, because I wanted to do like everybody else. I learned to drink vodka, just a little bit of vodka. There's half vodka, half water for me, of course. But, you know, just like they do there. As a mascot, the captain of that group that was a Polish officer of those partisans had a sense of humor. He decided that I should have a function like everybody else. Partisans, they all have something to do. And I was just sitting there. I couldn't be with my father because he was underground in a hospital further down. We were in groups with partisans. I was with the partisans. So he gave me a feather, and he called me the feather boy. And why the feather? Because when we went on sorties every now and then, not that often, but they used to catch 1 or 2 Germans that were going separately, always cutting their throat, of course. There's no shooting, because that would bring others. And when the soldier fell down, I would put the feather under the nose and count up to 100. So my first year of school became very useful. And if the feather didn't move, by the time I counted to 100, I would remove the belt and shoes, pull off the shoes, and then go to the next one if there were 2. And the same thing happened. If the feather moved, I would call somebody. I wasn't meant to kill anybody, I was just doing a job. And they would finish them, and I would take off the shoes. That was one of my functions. It was over a period of 1.5 years in the forest, and winter, of course. I had a favorite tree. I had a good tree, like I had a tree for petrol when I was young, but then I had a tree to hide in. Pine trees in winters are ideal for hiding because you've got snow sitting and it keeps you reasonably warm. You know, when you're sitting surrounded by snow, well, you've got clothes, of course, warm sort of clothing, skins of some sort, animal skins that you wear, that keeps you warm. In the forest we had a lot of lard, which is good for us, and onions again, of course, which is healthy, and bread and things like that. Occasionally we had meat. Every now and then they bring a horse over or a cow or something, and we would eat that. But unfortunately, because they couldn't light any fires, the partisan, because they would be seen, so whatever they brought, we had to eat raw. But, well, I've never been too keen on raw meat, but when you're hungry, everything tastes good, even raw, even a bit of raw horse. So that's that. Probably the two most memorable times in 18 months, and I'll be sitting here for a fortnight if I went on in greater details, was for my 10th birthday now, yeah, 10th birthday, yes, just before the end of the war. I was given a bread. Ukrainian bread were known to be round. Sometimes you see those bread, and some of you guys call those, in my younger days, they used to call them the wog bread. They weren't white sliced like everybody else had them when I went to school. But we wogs used to eat darkish sort of a bread, which was rye bread, round rye bread. And that was I was given as a birthday present. And I scratched on that bread till just about liberation. For 3 months I had it inside my shirt. That was additional. Whatever came, I ate, of course. But this is whenever I got hungry, I had that bread. That was the most precious present that I ever got in my life. Yes, I got many presents. Watches, Mont Blanc pen, you name it. Lots of presents over the years. But that bread, it wasn't worth as much as the Omega watch I'm wearing, but it was the most precious thing that I ever got in my life. Towards the end of my journey in the forest, there was a lot of bombing happening, because what happened, the Germans were retreating. We are in 1944. The Germans are retreating, the Russians are chasing them. We talk about the Black Forest and bombing and whatever. It happens, but my tree never got hit. In the morning I came down after one of those heavy nights, and there were a lot of people that were killed. And when you get hit with a bomb or something, bits and pieces fly out of the way. And I found a leg, a perfect leg. It was a man's leg, which was that one, and it was exactly my height. I stood it up next to me, it was frozen, but the leg was good. And of course, I wasn't stupid, I worked there. If I take that leg to my father, there's so many fellows walking with legs missing, there'd be somebody will get a new leg, a good leg. And so, well, that was my first thought of, I hadn't gone to biology like some of you guys, but that was my first thought. If you find a leg, you might as well use it. So I took that leg to my father. It took about 3 hours to get it across. Not more than 1.5 kilometers, perhaps, 3 hours. Slow going, because the snow was soft and the leg would go in, it was heavy when it's frozen leg. I would go in after the leg, I bring it up, and I hooked out a way of going in and out of the snow and working my way up. And I got it to my father. I asked where he was. I hadn't been seeing much of him, maybe once every few weeks I would go up there, because the hospital was a fair distance away and he was busy. So anyhow, so my father, they called him over. White overall to go, and it was very, very stained by then, because he was doing a lot of surgery. He became a good surgeon during the war. He started being a GP, but finished up a surgeon, because that's what they do. He wasn't curing colds. So that was what he was doing there. And he looked at that leg and he said, "Oh, thank you, thank you." And then he started crying and mumbling to us, what sort of world we live in. There's my son bringing me a leg. It wasn't what he had in mind for me. I think he had different lifestyle for me than where I happen to be. So he put that leg against, not the tree, but against a tent, like a big tent. It was sort of half on the ground, so it was leaning. And we talked for a while, and they tapped me on the head. He said, gave me a kiss. He says, I've got to go, I've got to go. I'll see you tomorrow, or I'll see you next time. So, all right, so he went and I went, but I turned around. And guess what? Yes, he guessed. He didn't understand that I spent 3 hours bringing that leg up there. He left the leg on that pole. He never took that leg. He walked away. Ha! He died. Came to him very quickly, grabbed him by the sleeve. He was still crying. And I said, oh, yes, sorry, Rishik. Took that leg and walked away with it. This is the last time I saw my father. So, after that, he was taken when the German retreated, as I told you before. He was taken and disappeared, never to be seen again. Exterminated at prison. On the topic of extermination, 23 members of my immediate family, including my father, both sides, grandparents, cousins, and aunties, in Poland were exterminated. Only my mother and I survived. 23 members were exterminated. I had family in France that survived. I had family in Russia that survived. I even had an uncle in Australia that brought me here eventually. But in Poland, 23 out of 25 of us were exterminated. That is the percentage. Just to give you an idea about children. Children, you're looking at about 1 child in 1,000 that survive. So I don't know how many people are here at Monash. You're not children, but beside the school you went to, I'm sure some of you went to the Scottish, 3,000 children, 3 would have survived. Okay? Just to give you an idea. MLC, 4 children. They nearly got 4,000 students for my granddaughter. That was a proportion of children that perished during the war. Were exterminated. Okay, the war finished. We were taken by the partisans to the village where I was reunited with my mother after 18 months. And some of you, I'm sure, don't understand what a Yiddish mama means. It means a Jewish mother. And a Jewish mother, the first thing she did after not seeing me for 18 months, she said, Richard, you've got a dirty nose. Where's your handkerchief? So I said, Mom, I ate the handkerchief. What? You ate your handkerchief? Why did you eat the handkerchief? I was hungry. She ate every day in the village. We ate only sometimes when something came to us to eat. So a handkerchief, in addition to, before that, bread, come quite useful. So that was that. Straight after that, we went back to my town. Unfortunately, in that town, we had friends, and we went to knocked on one door, which was lucky. That was the lady that was a very close friend of my mother's. And when they opened the door, she had a daughter. The daughter was Selenka. She was now 5 years old. Attractive little girl, blonde of course, and she called her Rishik. Rishik. Her mother grabbed her, and she actually fell over. She was a very good ambidextrous woman, because she grabbed her daughter one way, pulled her away. At the same time, she was slamming the door, and in the process, she was saying, "It's not Rishik. All the Jews are dead." She was my mother's best friend, that woman. Her husband worked for my dad, because dad was in charge of the hospital, having studied in France. All the Jews are dead. And I found it hard to understand. I said, hang on. I spent 5 years trying not to get killed. I go back to my clan. I see my little girlfriend. I'm told I'm dead. Oh, something wrong with the system. And that was a welcoming to Poland. After that, 3 months in a sanatorium because I had some problem with the lung, where I learned to play chess. It served me well over the years. And eventually, we were taken out when they allowed Jews to leave Poland in '46 after pogroms. We went to Germany in a displaced people camp. On the way, we got caught through Czechoslovakia and finished up in a week in jail. But fortunately, the police record didn't show it, or I wouldn't have that button there. You're not allowed to be in jail to receive the order of Australia. That's just one of the prerequisites. I spent a week in jail, and it was all a charade, because we were bought out. those people that were more important, they come in and come out of that jail, holding jail, whatever it was. It was all for money. The Czechs made money out of Americans who would bring money from, I don't know if you heard of Joint. It was an American organization, Jewish organization, that used to bring money, food, and so on for people. And we all got our turn to be taken out. And after about, I only stayed there for about 6 days, and they called out my mother's name, my name, and they put money. They used to have the typical Jewish accountant, short with glasses and a hat, coming in a jeep, guarded by about 4 military American soldiers, and would bring the money up in the suitcase, and they were counting the money, and they brought enough money, and 40 people would come out into the special American trucks. We'd finish up in a displaced people camp in Stuttgart, where I spent a year, and that was my first year of school. Well, my second year. First year was in the cupboard, second year was in Stuttgart. Now I'm only 11 years old. And we were taught all sorts of things because there were many kids that survived the war from various places, Poland and so on, all in displaced people camps. And in Hebrew, of course, we're learning Hebrew because all the kids now, those 14 and or more, were going to go to Palestine. That's before it became Israel. But I was one of the younger ones, and I have a mother, and of course she wasn't going to go there. But while we were there in that displaced people camp, the Red Cross looked for us, found us, and I had an uncle in Paris. And he got us out to France after a year. And that was great. But it wasn't all that good for me, because what happened, we had a big dinner there, all sorts of members of the family, and I had a cousin, Monique, that was exactly my age, which is now already 11, and a little one that was born during the war. My uncle was, of course, a doctor. My father helped him through university because he comes from a more affluent family, which is my mother's family. My father comes from a family that used to sell cucumbers at the market, so we don't get rich from that. But he helped him through university. All that's very relevant. Anyhow, big dinner, all family get together, everyone speaks French except for my uncle, who spoke Polish to me and to my mother, because we didn't understand. And that's when I ran out of luck. At last, I've been lucky for nearly 6 years. A roast beef came very close to me on the table. I don't know if you're familiar, but in France they eat roast beef, which is undercooked. So there's plenty of sauce, plenty of blood. And it was so close to me that I couldn't resist it, to take a slice and put it in here. And so, who knows? Maybe tomorrow I won't have a roast. Yeah, it's psychological. Got to, preservation. So I put that roast in here, and my auntie noticed it because the blood came around. She took me out by the ear, started hitting me. I explained to them that I spent a year and a half with the partisans, and you can hit me all night long, and it's not going to make any difference because partisans don't cry. So. But you know that not American, she was actually a white Russian. I won't use the word what I think about her because she's dead, but that white Russian woman that married my uncle arranged for an orphanage for me the next day. I spent the next 4.5 years in an orphanage. And the reason for it was given because my mother couldn't do anything about it because she couldn't speak French, she couldn't work, so she started, but I started in orphanage. And the reason for it is that I would have been a bad influence on the 2 little girls. I mean, a doctor's daughter looking so nice and pretty and same age as me, and another one. To have a savage like that in the house would have been bad influence on it. Well, such is life. In the orphanage, a couple of things that I want to mention. In the orphanage, we were very wild. There were kids, man, who survived the war, and they were very wild kids. So I've got cuts here, and I've got here. A razor got into my nose, but he didn't come out well either, because I also had a knife, so I did my first year of surgery while he was trying to get the razor out of my nose. You can split here, you can still see in the morning when I call mornings, there's a split in my nose. When he was trying to get that out, it was taller than me. Anyhow, we both went to hospital. I don't know what happened to him, but here I am. So I wish him all the best. whatever it might be. It was not a good idea to work with him. And
We'll be able to get something covered there.
Maybe like 15 minutes.
We've got a meeting in 15 minutes.
Just go, continue. Discuss.
Should we move to questions, maybe?
sorry,
Do you want to move to questions?
in 2 minutes I will, but I just
Just come
Is
through.
that okay? Just cover that.
Just come
We
through.
can't stand it. We just go.
Sorry. Sorry, guys.
Okay, so life in the orphanage was quite normal. Sports, school. I started back to school now. I was 11 years old and I started school. And in 4.5 years in France, I managed to get through from grade 0 to year 10. No, year 9. Year 10 I did on the boat to Australia. I finished up at the age of 16 when I arrived here. The first full glass of milk I had was at number 23 Steel Street, South Caulfield. That's where my uncle had his house. And I had my first full glass of milk at the age of 15. I'm sure most of you started before that. It was nice, it was very good. And life, once again, became wonderful. To finish the story, I went to Melbourne High, where I was a dropout because I couldn't speak English, so they sent me to Melbourne Tech. Melbourne Tech, I was a dropout because I could see if I studied for another 3 more years, I'd be earning less than if I could earn now by dropping out. So I dropped out. So I got the distinction of being a dropout boss from Melbourne High and RMIT. But the only thing I got left is on the honour board of the recipient of the Order of Australia. At Melbourne High I happened to be there, and at RMIT I happened to be there as well. So that's my consolation for being a dropout from both. Here I am, and I'm happy to answer all the questions that you might have. But before I do that, I want to do one more thing, is to dedicate my address to the 1.5 million children that perished during the Holocaust. They never had a chance to tell the story. And also to all those children that have survived and they don't want to talk about it, or they can't talk about it, or they don't have the opportunity to talk about it. I'm their voice. I speak to them because I've got no problem talking, as you already worked out. I speak on behalf of all those that have been silenced. I will never forget, and I will never forgive. I know people saying, got to forget, you got to move on. I will never forget what I told you, and I will never forgive what happened to us. Thank you, and please, who's first? Yes?
Did your mother come with you to Australia?
My mother came with me, yes, she lived till 99. In fact, she lived till 100, but she got her rights, so it became 99. Yes, she lived here. She lived in South Caulfield with my uncle and I when I went to school. Yes, she survived all the way then. So,
It's a question over there.
sorry.
How long did you live in the Lublin ghetto for?
In Lublin,
Yeah.
I was in Lublin ghetto for just 6 months. It was just between the time I got caught and between the time where deported. It was already getting light. We're looking at end of 42, 43 already, because the last 1.5 years was spent in the forest.
How was life like in the ghetto?
Lublin ghetto life was bad, because for me then it became bad. That was the first reality which I mentioned to you, like came to what the Holocaust was all about, and the bodies were being taken out. I had to go, I was in hiding, because kids were being chased by dogs. I tried once to go out, because I was like a second opinion of my own. But I found that the second opinion, which was mine, to go out was not a good idea, so I stuck to the first opinion. Yes, food was very scarce, and of course everybody was very upset, because it was light already, so people knew that it was only a question of time before we move on. There was nowhere to go before we move on to get exterminated. It was just customers, world customers in those days. Sorry, I saw another hand or something, okay?
So, Richard, you've received an OAM. I was wondering if you could talk about your
Over
work.
Australia?
Yeah.
Well, I received it for my contribution to chess. I founded the 2 chess clubs. One, besides being board one for Melbourne High, which is quite good because they have a lot of clever kids there, good chess players. I played the #1 board for Melbourne High in 1953. I started the RMIT chess club because we have lots of students from Colombo students in those days, and they were older, and some of them could play chess, and we had a lot of walks, like myself, coming from Eastern Europe that played chess. Australian kids in 50th Street didn't play. They weren't playing. They didn't play football, swimming, tennis, but chess was not on the agenda. Now it is perhaps. So I founded that club, and in 56 I founded the St Kilda Chess Club, which became the second largest chess club in Australia. I founded that in my mother's flat we shared. Started with 3 tables, finished up with 110 boards at Caulfield Hospital, next to the hospital. That was one of the second largest clubs in Australia. My contribution to Bridge, mainly through the fact that I was for 11 years the president of the Victorian Bridge Association, 11 years, but also because I was a member of the Australian team that played in the World Championships and Olympics in Europe, and also because I became a grandmaster in 1989. So that combined those sort of things. And the last thing was that I was honorary assistant to finances to the Royal Children's Hospital. 2 of my friends, one of them is a very well-known professor that most of you would have heard if you heard of oncologist, Professor Henry Eckert, who is my closest friend. We went to Melbourne High together. He finished, he's not a dropout. And he invited me to assist with finances, because for some reason or other he thought maybe if I'd stayed at school long enough I would have finished up in something to do with finances. So that's my occupation. So I helped the Royal Children's Hospital for nearly 3 years in finances. That's, and of course a guide in the Holocaust Museum and a few other things. That put all together, it was a package that got me the order of Australia. I am now on the Victorian Executive. I've got a meeting this afternoon, that's why I'm wearing the tie. And my cufflinks is on the suit, not to impress you, but because I've got a meeting at 3 o'clock in the city. Although I'm sure you're all impressed. Thank you. And I'm also the National Executive because I'm in charge of merchandise. All the things that we have, the receiving of the order throughout Australia, I am in charge of the sales, because nobody else wants to be a glorified salesman. But having been a dropout from everywhere, I can be a salesman. All the other professors that are on our committee and so on the government and everyone else, they wouldn't be selling ties, and surely not. Yes, please.
How did the partisans treat the Jews?
Sorry?
How did the partisans treat the Jews?
The partisans, it's a good question. Those partisans were called Armia Krajova, which is home army. They were 100% anti-Semitic. They would kill Russians because they wanted free Poland. They would kill Germans because they wanted free Poland. And they would kill Jews just for fun, because they were Jews. Not because we were doing any harm, but to kill a Jew was not a problem. The only reason why they treated me well, they needed doctors more than they hired Jews. So I was the mascot and needed my father. Well, that's why I was there, not because they liked us. Yes, they were very anti-Semitic kids. Yes, please. Still got a little time.
Have you been back to Poland ever since?
Pardon?
Have you been back to Poland ever since?
I had the great pleasure of refusing to go to Poland because I was a member of the Australian team that had to play in Warsaw. My fares were paid, I was a member of the team, they had to get a reserve because before I left Australia I said, in this life I will never go back to Germany and I will never go back to Poland. And I had an opportunity to refuse to apply in Hamburg and I refused to apply in Warsaw. That's my memory of Poland. You heard that girl, the little girl, that's Idrisha Krisha? That's what I remember of Poland. I know it's not the country, but that's the way I feel about it. Never forget, never forgive. Please, yes?
Do you think something like the Holocaust could happen again in today's?
Well, when I started talking about this many, many years ago at the Floods conference in New York, where I had a little talk, and I finished by saying, I hope that the world, that's 20 odd years ago, I hope that the world has learned something from the Holocaust. At least it was murder of such large proportion that perhaps the world has learned something. You know what? Over the last 30 years the world had learned nothing because we had Rwanda, we had Bosnia, we've got all those African countries killing each other. They've learned nothing. So that's it, but they've learned nothing. Maybe one day, maybe you guys will do something in the future to change it, but nothing has changed. People are getting slaughtered.
We have time for one more question. One or two.
So, Us as the youth of today hearing child survivors like yourself.
Sorry?
Us as the youth of today hearing child survivors like yourself.
Yes.
What's one great message that we can sort of go away with and continue for the future?
Well, seeing that you're all young, in 30 years' time, when we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto, today we are commemorating the 70th. In 30 years' time, there will be no survivors because we are amongst the young ones and we're getting close to 80. So in 30 years' time, 110, there won't be too many of us, the 110 years old. Assuming that we're all gone, I'd like all of you, each one of you. I'm not asking for a pledge, but I would like you to somehow or other, when you hear about the 100th anniversary, but then you'll be 30 years older, to mention to someone, to your children, your grandchildren, to your friend or whatever, wife's husband, mention that one day, when I was at Monash, I heard what you heard today, and at least we'll be remembered for 30 more years. After that, the King of France once said, "Après moi le déluge." For those of you that don't speak French, after me floods. So, who knows? I hope it's not the case. I hope we don't have the floods. I hope you guys will save the deluge. I have one more question. That's it.
Question?
You mentioned that you've never forgiven, but would you consider anyone in modern times to have a continuity of responsibility for the Holocaust?
Someone, well, you have to answer that yourself. I mean, who is responsible for it? It was just, well, first of all, for those of you that are not Jewish, you probably know that Jews have it's always been a good sport to, it goes right back to the biblical days, to the Roman, to where we can go back. Jews have been known to be victims. Someone says that they were meant to suffer for the conscience of the world. I always say, pick someone else to suffer. I don't need to suffer just because I'm Jew. The Jews have been killed, the pogroms have been, anti-Semitism has been strong in France. You've probably heard of Dreyfus, who was wrongly accused just because he happened to be a Jew. They looked for someone that they could put in jail in France. That happens everywhere, as far as I'm concerned. The Rosenbergs were exterminated for being communists in America. It was half because of the communists and half because of the Jews. At that particular time, I'm not saying that America is anti-Jewish, they're not, but it seems to be that we have been disproportionately picked to suffer. And who is responsible? Well, the fellow with the moustache, I guess. He made a name for himself. He's been dead a long time, I'm still here. The 1,000-year Reich, as you heard, didn't quite last 1,000 years, lasted less than 10. Fortunately for us.
Okay, on that note, thank you very, very much for coming.
You want to get drunk, eh?
A little present.
Thank you, guys. We'll drink this.
Thank you. Thank you all very, very much for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Everyone felt like they learned something today. And if you want to keep following what events the Jewish Students Society does, like us on Facebook or come speak to me after this and you can sign up and get our emails. So, thank you very much.
Also, one more thing before you go. There is a depository of Holocaust survivors' testimonies, of which one of them is mine, here at Monash. Monash was the third depository in the world. It's run by Spielberg Foundation. It's got 49,000 testimonies from all over the world, about 2,000 from Australia. And it is here, it's available here. I think John Baker is in charge of that. Mark Baker is in charge of that, this Holocaust studies. And any of you, if you just want a second opinion to see what I might have missed, because 5 years is a long time, 20 minutes is still so long, you can check on Richard Rozen OAN, and you will see some more 2 hours of testimonies. But many other testimonies are available for any of you that want to. But more important, don't forget us.
Definitely. And on the note of the continuing prevalence of genocide and racism throughout the world, or just national, which is or just being the Australasian Union of Jewish Students, they prepared a few cards So just when you leave this event, maybe pick one up. I'll just move to the front. Thank you very much. That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.